A man doesn't walk away suddenly. He leaves after being emotionally exhausted, unheard, and taken for granted. When he walks away, he takes his patience, protection, and presence with him. Only then does his absence become loud, and regret arrives too late. A man doesn't walk away suddenly. He leaves after being emotionally exhausted. Long before his feet move in the opposite direction, his heart has been fighting a silent battle. He stays through confusion, through disappointment, through moments where he feels unseen but still hopeful. He convinces himself that patience is strength and endurance is love. He tells himself that if he just explains better, tries harder, gives more, things will eventually change. Emotional exhaustion doesn't come from one argument or one mistake. It builds slowly through repeated dismissal of his feelings, through conversations that never truly listen, through effort that goes unnoticed. A man can tolerate pain, but what drains him is the feeling that his pain doesn't matter. He begins to feel like his role is to provide stability, while his emotional needs are treated as secondary or inconvenient. At first, he communicates. He expresses discomfort, disappointment, and concern, often in a controlled and respectful way. When that doesn't lead to change, he simplifies his words. When even silence fails to bring awareness, he starts to withdraw emotionally. This withdrawal is not coldness, it is self-protection. It is the mind conserving energy after realizing that vulnerability has become unsafe. Many mistake this phase as him being fine. In reality, he is processing loss while still present. He is grieving the relationship he hoped for, mourning the version of love he believed in. He lowers his expectations, not because he wants less, but because hoping has become too painful. Each compromise chips away at his sense of self, and slowly he begins to question whether staying is costing him more than leaving ever could. A man's breaking point is rarely loud. There is no dramatic exit, no explosive confrontation. There is clarity. One day he realizes that love should not require constant emotional sacrifice. He understands that staying loyal while feeling invisible is not noble. It is self-neglect. That realization changes everything. When emotional exhaustion reaches its peak, detachment follows naturally. His heart disconnects before his body does. By the time he decides to leave, he has already let go internally. The decision feels calm, almost unsettlingly peaceful, because the emotional war is over. He is no longer trying to be understood. He is choosing to understand himself. This is why his departure feels sudden to others. They didn't see the nights he spent questioning his worth, the effort he kept giving without return, the patience he extended past its limit. They only notice when his presence is gone. What they call sudden is actually the final step of a long invisible journey. A man doesn't walk away because he stopped loving. He walks away because love without emotional safety becomes unbearable. Exhaustion teaches him that self-respect must come before attachment, and once that lesson is learned, walking away is no longer an impulse, it is relief. Silence from a man is not weakness. It is the final stage of detachment. It comes after words have failed, after explanations have been misunderstood, and after emotions have been repeatedly dismissed. A man is often conditioned to believe that expressing feelings is a risk, yet when he does open up, it is usually because he still cares. His silence begins only when caring starts to feel like a liability rather than a connection. In the beginning, he speaks. He tries to communicate his discomfort in a measured, logical way. He chooses his words carefully, hoping to be heard without causing conflict. When that effort is met with defensiveness, minimization, or indifference, he doesn't immediately withdraw. Instead, he gives more chances. He convinces himself that understanding takes time, that patience will be rewarded, that consistency will eventually create change. As time passes, something shifts. Repeating the same concern starts to feel humiliating. Explaining himself begins to feel like begging for basic consideration. Each ignored conversation teaches him that his emotional voice holds little weight. Silence slowly becomes safer than speaking, not because he has nothing to say, but because saying it no longer makes a difference. This silence is often misread. People assume he is calm, unbothered, or emotionally unavailable. In reality, he is emotionally spent. Silence is the result of internal resolution, not emotional absence. He has already accepted the truth he once tried to avoid. That effort alone cannot sustain a relationship where emotional reciprocity is missing. Detachment doesn't happen overnight. It is a gradual pulling back of emotional investment. He stops expecting. He stops initiating difficult conversations. He stops hoping that his needs will suddenly matter. This is not indifference. It is self-preservation. Silence becomes the boundary he creates when verbal boundaries have been crossed too many times. By the time a man becomes silent, he has already processed the ending internally. He has grieved while still present, made peace while still attached, and emotionally prepared himself to leave long before anyone notices. That is why his eventual departure feels abrupt to others. They hear the silence but fail to understand its meaning. Silence is clarity. It signals that the fight is over, not because he lost, but because he no longer wants to win at the cost of his dignity. There is no anger in this stage, no need for validation. There is only acceptance. He understands that continuing to explain himself would only deepen the disconnect. When a man goes silent, it is not an invitation to chase him. It is a sign that he has already let go. Words are tools of connection, and when he puts them down, it means he has recognized that connection is no longer possible in the way he once hoped. Silence from a man is not weakness. It is the quiet ending of emotional attachment, the final step before distance becomes permanent, and the moment he chooses peace over being understood. Love ends when respect repeatedly dies. Not all at once, not in a single moment of betrayal or conflict, but slowly through patterns that go unnoticed or ignored. Love can survive misunderstandings, distance, even pain, but it cannot survive the consistent erosion of dignity. When respect fades, love is forced to carry a weight it was never meant to bear. Respect is felt in how someone listens, how they speak, how they disagree. It shows up in tone, in timing, in consideration. When respect is present, even hard conversations feel safe. But when respect begins to disappear, love becomes a place of tension rather than comfort. Words start to sting instead of soothe. Effort feels demanded rather than appreciated. Slowly, affection turns into obligation. Repeated disrespect doesn't always look dramatic. Often it appears as subtle dismissal, interrupting, mocking emotions, minimizing concerns, or taking someone's presence for granted. Each instance sends a quiet message. Your feelings are optional. Over time, these moments accumulate, and the person on the receiving end begins to feel smaller inside the relationship. Love, which once felt expansive, starts to feel confining. People often try to save love by enduring disrespect, believing patience will restore harmony. They excuse behavior, rationalize patterns, and silence their own discomfort to keep the peace. But love built on self-silencing is not love. It is survival. The more someone suppresses their need for respect, the more resentment grows beneath the surface. Love cannot thrive in resentment. It withers quietly. What makes repeated disrespect so damaging is its predictability. Once someone realizes that apologies don't lead to change, trust begins to erode. Hope weakens. The heart stops reaching out because it learns that vulnerability is unsafe. Love may still exist emotionally, but it becomes guarded, conditional, and tired. A shift occurs. The person who once tried to explain now observes. The one who once fought for understanding now withdraws. This is not because love disappeared suddenly, but because self-worth finally demanded attention. Respect is the foundation that allows love to feel secure. Without it, love becomes an act of self-betrayal. The end of love often looks quiet from the outside. There is no dramatic confrontation, no explosive ending. There is distance, emotional detachment, a calmness that replaces longing. By the time love officially ends, it has already been mourning its own loss for a long time. Repeated loss of respect teaches a painful lesson. Love without dignity is unsustainable. People can forgive mistakes, but they cannot indefinitely tolerate being devalued. Once someone realizes that staying requires shrinking themselves, leaving becomes an act of self-preservation. Love doesn't end because feelings disappear. It ends because respect was neglected too many times. And when respect dies repeatedly, love eventually follows, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. A man stays loyal longer than he stays happy. This is one of the most misunderstood realities of emotional commitment. Loyalty for many men is not just about faithfulness. It is about responsibility, identity, and honor. When a man commits, he often does so with the intention to endure, to hold things together, even when they begin to fall apart internally. Happiness becomes negotiable. Loyalty does not. In the early stages of dissatisfaction, he rarely speaks up loudly. He minimizes his discomfort, convincing himself that every relationship has phases, that temporary unhappiness is the price of long-term stability. He tells himself that leaving at the first sign of emotional struggle would make him unreliable or weak. So he stays, hoping circumstances will improve, hoping effort will be noticed, hoping consistency will be rewarded. What people fail to see is the emotional labor involved in staying loyal while unhappy. A man continues to show up, continues to protect, continues to provide emotional and physical presence, even as his inner fulfillment declines. He smiles through frustration, offers reassurance while needing it himself, and carries the weight quietly. Loyalty becomes a shield he hides behind, even when happiness is slipping away. Over time, this imbalance takes a toll. Suppressing unhappiness doesn't make it disappear, it internalizes it. The man begins to feel emotionally isolated within the relationship. He may still care deeply, still feel responsible, but joy becomes rare. The relationship starts to feel like a duty rather than a partnership. He remains not because he is content, but because he believes commitment means staying regardless of personal cost. This is why many men don't leave at the peak of conflict. They leave after long periods of emotional compromise. Loyalty keeps them anchored long after happiness has left the room. They tolerate emotional neglect, lack of appreciation, and unresolved issues far longer than expected because walking away feels like a personal failure. However, loyalty collides with self-respect. A man reaches a point where staying loyal requires abandoning himself. That realization is painful. It forces him to confront the truth that commitment should not require emotional sacrifice without reciprocity. Loyalty, when unbalanced, becomes self-neglect. When a man finally chooses to leave, it shocks those around him. From the outside, it appears sudden or unnecessary, but internally, the decision has been forming for a long time. He has already tried to fix, adapt, and endure. Leaving is not an impulsive act. It is the result of prolonged emotional exhaustion. A man doesn't stop loving easily. He stops tolerating unhappiness when it threatens his sense of worth. Loyalty kept him present long after joy faded. But once he understands that happiness is not selfish, it is essential, he begins to choose himself. A man stays loyal longer than he stays happy, but no one can remain loyal to a place that slowly erases them. When happiness is absent for too long, even the strongest loyalty eventually reaches its limit. When a man walks away, he takes his protection, patience, and presence with him. These are not things that disappear overnight. They are withdrawn after being stretched, tested, and taken for granted. Long before he leaves physically, these qualities have already been overused without acknowledgement. His departure simply makes their absence visible. Protection is more than physical strength. It is emotional shielding, reliability, and the quiet assurance that someone has your back. A man offers protection instinctively when he feels valued and respected. He absorbs stress so others don't have to, stands firm in conflict, and creates a sense of safety through consistency. But when his effort is dismissed or his intentions are questioned repeatedly, that instinct begins to fade. Protection cannot exist where trust is constantly undermined. Patience is often mistaken for tolerance without limit. In reality, patience is a conscious choice, a decision to stay calm, to explain again, to give space, to forgive. A man's patience is deeply tied to hope. He remains patient because he believes things can improve, that understanding will come with time. But patience erodes when growth never follows promises, when the same issues repeat without accountability. What drains him is not conflict, but the lack of change. Presence is the most overlooked sacrifice. Being present means being emotionally available, attentive, and engaged. It means listening when tired, showing up when overwhelmed, and staying connected even during personal struggle. A man's presence is an investment of energy and focus. When that presence is taken for granted, when attention is demanded but not reciprocated, he slowly pulls back to conserve what little emotional strength he has left. When a man finally walks away, these qualities don't vanish out of bitterness. They leave because they are no longer safe to give. His protection is reserved for places where it is respected. His patience is saved for people who value growth. His presence is offered only where it is wanted, not assumed. This is why his absence feels heavier than expected. People don't miss him immediately. They miss what he provided. They notice the lack of emotional stability, the missing reassurance, the silence where support used to be. Only then do they realize the weight of what they lost. A man doesn't take these things away to punish anyone. He withdraws them to protect himself. Giving endlessly without receiving drains even the strongest spirit. Walking away is his way of reclaiming balance. Once these qualities are gone, they rarely return to the same place. Not because he cannot give them again, but because he has learned the cost of giving them where they were unappreciated. He understands that his protection, patience, and presence are not obligations. They are privileges. When a man walks away, he doesn't just leave a relationship. He removes the quiet pillars that held it together, and only in their absence does their value become fully understood. Regret arrives late, usually after the man is already healed. It doesn't appear during the arguments, the emotional distance, or the warnings disguised as silence. Regret shows up when the chaos settles, when the absence becomes permanent, and when there is no longer a chance to undo what was ignored. By the time regret is felt, the man has already done the hardest work alone. While he was still present, his pain was easy to overlook. His consistency created the illusion that everything was fine. His patience made it seem like he would always stay. People rarely feel regret when they believe access is guaranteed. They feel it only when the safety net disappears. Healing for a man is not loud or visible. It happens quietly, in isolation. After walking away, he rebuilds himself without announcing it. He reflects, accepts, and slowly detaches from the emotional weight he once carried. He learns where he compromised too much, where he stayed too long, and where he lost himself trying to keep something alive. Healing gives him clarity, not bitterness. Regret, on the other hand, is reactive. It begins when the emotional benefits he once provided are no longer available. The late replies, the emotional distance, the calm boundaries, these changes trigger realization. Suddenly, his value is recognized, but recognition comes without access. What once felt replaceable now feels irreplaceable. This is the cruel timing of regret. It arrives when apologies no longer move him, when explanations no longer matter, when effort finally appears, but too late. Healing has already shifted his priorities. The man who once would have listened endlessly now listens selectively. The one who once waited patiently now values peace over reconciliation. People often assume regret means love has returned. In reality, regret is often about loss of comfort, not loss of connection. It is the realization that someone's presence was doing emotional work that is now missing. It is the absence of protection, stability, and consistency that creates discomfort, not necessarily the return of love. By the time regret surfaces, the man has already learned his lesson. He understands that love should not require self-abandonment. He has replaced longing with self-respect. Healing teaches him that going back to the source of his pain would undo the growth he fought for. This is why second chances rarely work at this stage. Not because he holds grudges, but because he holds standards. He is no longer willing to re-enter a situation where his worth had to be proven. Healing closes doors gently but firmly. Regret arrives late because it requires distance to be felt. Healing happens early because pain demands attention. And once a man heals, he does not revisit chapters that nearly broke him. Regret waits for absence to teach its lesson. Healing ensures that when regret finally knocks, the door is already closed. A woman feels the loss only when replacement is impossible. Not because she lacked emotion before, but because availability can dull appreciation. When someone is consistently present, forgiving, and emotionally accessible, their value becomes familiar. Familiarity often creates the illusion that what exists will always be there or can easily be replaced. In the beginning, attention is abundant. Options feel open. Validation comes from multiple directions, making one person's effort seem less significant. When a man is patient, emotionally invested, and reliable, his presence can start to feel predictable rather than precious. The mind assumes continuity. Loss does not feel real when access is still intact. The shift happens when that access is removed, when the man who once stayed stops responding the same way, stops prioritizing, stops making himself available. At first, it feels like distance, not loss. There is confusion, curiosity, even a sense of control, because the belief remains that he can be reached if needed. Replacement seems possible in theory. Attention can be found elsewhere. Conversation can be replicated. But what cannot be easily replaced is depth, emotional safety, and consistency built over time. These qualities are only understood in their absence. Loss becomes real when attempts to replace him fail to recreate the same emotional experience. New connections may provide excitement, but they lack the familiarity of being fully known. They may offer attraction, but not stability. This is when comparison begins. Not consciously at first, but emotionally. The mind starts recalling how safe it once felt, how effort was given without being asked, how patience existed without conditions. The realization is quiet and uncomfortable. It comes late at night, in moments of emotional vulnerability, when distractions no longer work. That is when absence becomes heavy. Not because he was perfect, but because he was irreplaceable in the ways that mattered most. This is the moment when regret starts to take shape. Not necessarily regret for the ending, but regret for the lack of appreciation while he was present. The loss is felt not as pain alone, but as emptiness, an emotional gap no one else seems to fill. By the time replacement feels impossible, the man has already moved on internally. He has stopped offering access. He has reclaimed his emotional energy. The door that once felt open is now closed, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. This timing creates the deepest disconnect. One heart realizes value too late, while the other has already healed. The woman is left processing the loss at the very moment the man is no longer emotionally available to receive it. Loss is not always felt when something ends. Sometimes it is felt when something cannot be recovered. Replacement becomes impossible not because there are no options, but because the emotional standard has been set too high by someone who is no longer there. Some departures are not abandonment, they are self-preservation. Not every goodbye is rooted in a lack of love or commitment. Sometimes leaving is the only way a person can protect their mental, emotional, and psychological well-being. From the outside, it can look like giving up. From the inside, it feels like survival. People often confuse endurance with loyalty. They believe staying longer proves depth, while leaving signals weakness. But what is rarely acknowledged is how much strength it takes to walk away from something you once hoped would heal instead of hurt. Self-preservation begins when someone realizes that remaining requires them to continuously betray their own needs. A person reaches this point after repeated attempts to fix, explain, and adjust. They compromise their boundaries, soften their expectations, and silence their discomfort for the sake of peace. Over time, this self-silencing becomes a pattern. What was once flexibility turns into self-erasure. Staying starts to feel heavy, draining, and unsafe. Departure becomes necessary when the cost of staying exceeds the fear of leaving. This is not impulsive. It is the result of long internal conflict. The person has weighed loyalty against self-respect, attachment against dignity. Walking away is not about winning or punishing someone else. It is about no longer losing oneself. Self-preservation often looks calm. There is no need to argue or justify. The emotional battle has already been fought internally. By the time someone leaves, they have accepted that love cannot exist without mutual care. They understand that effort without reciprocity leads only to exhaustion. Those left behind may interpret the departure as abandonment because they experience the loss suddenly. But for the one leaving, the process has been gradual. They have been detaching emotionally long before the physical separation. Their departure is simply the final act of choosing themselves. Leaving to preserve oneself does not erase the love that once existed. It acknowledges that love alone is not enough to sustain a healthy connection. Respect, safety, and emotional consideration are equally necessary. When these are consistently missing, staying becomes harmful. Self-preservation also changes a person. It teaches them the value of boundaries and the importance of self-awareness. After leaving, they are less likely to tolerate emotional imbalance again, not because they are colder, but because they are wiser. Some departures are misunderstood because they challenge the narrative that love requires endless sacrifice. In reality, love should not demand the destruction of self. Walking away can be the most loving act toward oneself, even if it disappoints others. Self-preservation is not abandonment. It is the refusal to continue suffering in silence. It is the courage to choose healing over familiarity. And when someone leaves for this reason, they are not escaping responsibility. They are finally taking responsibility for their own well-being. In every relationship, the moments of departure, silence, and withdrawal carry lessons often overlooked until it is too late. A man leaves not because he stops loving, but because love without respect, understanding, and appreciation becomes unbearable. His loyalty, patience, protection, and presence are gifts that are easily taken for granted until they are gone. Regret may arrive, but healing comes first, leaving lessons that are realized only in absence. Departures are not always abandonment. They are acts of self-preservation, choices to honor one's worth and dignity. The truth is, love and loyalty have limits, and when those limits are reached, Life changes quietly, irrevocably, and profoundly. Understanding this can teach us the value of presence, respect, and emotional reciprocity before it's too late.